The Jets head down to Miami for Week 14 action against the Dolphins. Time is running out. Can this team give its fan base any sort of positive memories from the 2024 season? Let's talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, December 6th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the Jets head down to Miami for their first of two games against the Miami Dolphins this season. That's right. We got to December before the Jets play Miami for the first time. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern from Miami on Sunday. The game will be televised on CBS. Today, we're here to preview the game. Can the Jets get their fourth win of the season? Can the Jets get their first road win of the season? And if we're going to be honest, the Jets are playing out the string. Now, technically, the Jets enter this weekend still alive in the AFC playoff race. It's more likely than not the Jets will be eliminated this weekend from playoff contention officially, but the Jets are still mathematically alive. However, there's not really much of a path to the playoffs. In fact, if you go through the simulator that The Athletic runs, even if the Jets win out, even if the Jets win their last 5 games, they still only have like a 1% chance because they would need so much help. And this team has not shown it's capable of winning one game, much less 5 games in a row to close out the season. I think another thing that makes this season more difficult than others is that you're not really building to anything in the future. I mean, there have been past Jet seasons where the team has at least claimed it's been rebuilding. I think it's highly dubious to suggest that the Jets have ever really embraced a rebuild. But there have been other points where in time where the Jets have been claiming they're building to something bigger, where, maybe this wasn't the year we were expecting big things. So we're trying to build momentum heading into the next season. We're trying to develop players. That's clearly not the case this season. This was an all-in season. This was an all-in season with a 40-year-old quarterback who just turned 31 a few days ago. The Jets were the team loaded with veterans. They talked Super Bowl. And this year, there's no excuse like last year. Last year they had the excuse our quarterback went down on the first series of the year. We didn't have our starting quarterback all season long except for 4 plays. There's no such excuse this year. And this is not really a team that's building to anything else. Now, of course, there are some younger players you'd like to see develop. But this team had high expectations. This had to be the year for the Jets. And clearly it's not the year. And not only is it not the year, this is one of the worst teams in the NFL. A highly frustrating season for a fan base that frankly deserves better. I mean, if you're still rooting for the Jets at this point, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you are a diehard fan of diehard fans, because the Jets are now about to complete their 14th straight season missing the playoffs, the longest drought in North American professional sports in any of the 4 leagues, the longest drought by a number of years. It's not even close. Jets have not been to the playoffs since 2010. They will not make it this year, in a year where they hyped themselves up. I mean, the Jets were talking a big game heading into the season, and simply it has not played out that way. And unfortunately, there's no end in sight to the drought, because all of the moves, all the salary cap maneuverings the Jets have made over the last couple of years have made it very unlikely this team's going to be able to bounce back in 1 year. And even if they could, it's really tough to have faith in the ownership right now. Now, I know there are the tank commanders out there who want to see the Jets lose for draft positioning. I cannot say I'm among them. I think one of the things that's been proven over and over in the NFL draft is it's not about when you pick, it's about who's doing the picking. Good GMs find ways to hit on first-round picks deep in the first round, late in the first round. Bad GMs whiff in the top 5, the top 10. That's something that's been shown to happen over and over. This is not like the NBA. In the NBA, you get to the late lottery, it's tough to find a good player. In the NFL draft, there are going to be great players all available through the first round, into the second round, into the third round, usually into the fourth round before it really becomes a dart throw. So I'm not really big on the concept of tanking. If you want to root for the tank because in theory, a higher pick is a better asset for the Jets, I mean, I can't argue with you, but I don't really believe in tanking. At the same time, as we laid out, I don't think there's really anything to be gained by winning these games. And I think that's one of the things that makes it tough, is that you can't really find greater meaning in these games. Jets aren't really, winning doesn't really accomplish anything, but does a loss really accomplish all that much? Are you real? How many? I mean, you're a couple young players you're looking at as potential, as guys who could potentially develop, but there aren't that many. I think as a sports fan, this is the worst place to be because it's difficult to find any sort of meaning. When you're rebuilding or when you're playing for when you're in a rough season, there's at least something to look forward to. You can at least find meaning in losing. There's no real meaning in any of these games. So the question is for me whether the Jets will give their fan base some sort of oasis, some sort of afternoon where we can forget about our troubles. One day of glory in a lost, painful season. Around this time last year, the Jets gave us that day of glory. It came against the Houston Texans. It was an early December game where the Jets were expected to be blown out because the Houston Texans were on their way to winning the AFC South Championship. The first half was a very ugly, poorly played game. They went to the locker room 0-0. The Jets exploded for 30 points in the second half. They ended up blowing out the Houston Texans. And I remember after that game, I mentioned it. I said, you know what? This team's not, last year, the team was not very good. It probably was not going to continue. In fact, the next week was the Jets trip to Miami last year. The week after they beat Houston, they went down to Miami and got blown out 30-0 by the Dolphins. But at least you had found some moments of joy. And joy has been very fleeting in this Jets season. I can think of two real moments where this team's been exciting. The first was the week 3 game against the Patriots on Thursday night when the Jets blew the Patriots out. And for one fleeting moment, for one day, or maybe for the full week leading up to the Denver game, it felt like maybe this team would actually make good on the potential we all hoped it had because the Jets played at such a high level in that game. And then there was Halloween night against Houston where the Jets shook off a very, very shaky first half. They managed to stay close at halftime and ended up opening the floodgates on the Houston Texans. Again, it was the Texans. Can the Jets give us one more moment like that? Can, in a lost season, because we know there's going to be more pain along the way. We know there's going to be more losses. We know there's going to be more bad football. Can this team find that extra gear? Can this team find a way to give us some taste of the potential we thought it had? We know this team is not going to live up to expectations. We know this team's not going to come close to living up to expectations. This is a failed season. This Aaron Rodgers trade is a completely failed experiment when you factor in all the other moves it led to, when you factor in all the extra cap space it led the Jets to borrow from the future, when you talk about all the draft picks they traded trying to load up around Rodgers and how virtually none of these moves have worked. This is not a game about the big picture because between now and the end of the season, these final 5 games, there's not a lot that's going to be accomplished for the New York Jets. We know that this season will not be remembered fondly. This will be remembered as one of the most painful seasons in Jets history for its fans and for the franchise itself. But can we have one moment? Can we knock a bitter rival out of the playoff race? Can we deliver a decisive blow to a Miami team on the fringes of the AFC playoff race, but only hanging on by a thread? And can we just get one Sunday afternoon of enjoyable football? Because the 2 moments of glory the Jets have had this year have both been on Thursday night, which is great. I mean, I think it's great when you win Thursday night because you cruise into the weekend knowing that your team already won. You can watch the game stress-free on Sunday. But can we have one Sunday afternoon where this team delivers? One Sunday afternoon where we get to celebrate? That's the hope. It's a very, very unambitious hope. These are expectations far lower. These are hopes far lower than we began the season with. But it's where we're at. This is a 3-9 football team. It will finish with a losing record for a 9th consecutive season. It's on its way to finishing with double-digit losses for a 5th consecutive season. You got to take what you can get. And at this point, hopefully that's what the Jets can give us. There's not a lot of reason to be confident that's what they can give us, but I think those are the stakes for this game. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about this Jets offense. I'm not even going to say it anymore because usually I talk about how the matchups the Jets can exploit. I'm past the point of saying the Jets can exploit any sort of matchups. What can the Jets do to get going on offense? What can the Jets do to show life on offense? Let's talk about it continuing here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time's the best place to go to get last-minute tickets, and Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've used Game Time myself on a number of occasions, just used it last week, get tickets to a Broadway show. It's amazing. You see the view from your seat before you buy. They have a picture of what it's going to look like from your seat, so there's no surprises when you arrive. I also love it, the all-in pricing. Sometimes you buy a ticket, but there are hidden fees. Not on Game Time. You go to the all-in pricing. They'll tell you exactly what you're going to pay for your seat. So you want to head down to Miami last minute. Maybe you live in South Florida. I know the Jets have a pretty big fan base who live in Florida. Game Time is the place to go if you want to see the Jets play the Dolphins this Sunday. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's Locked On NFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day. This is the daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Jets in Miami this weekend for Week 14 action. Jets will play the Dolphins twice the final 5 weeks of the season. When the schedule came out, this seemed like a very exciting game. First of all, it seemed like the games against the Dolphins fell at a really good point on the calendar for the Jets, because you always want to play Miami late in the season in Miami. You don't want to play Miami early in the season because September, it's still really hot and humid in Florida. The players aren't really in game shape yet. So the Dolphins have a pretty big home field advantage that first month or so of the season, even sometimes into October, just because the heat and humidity down in Miami. Summer lasts long down in Miami. So you want to get them late in the season because, if you've gone outside of the New York area the last couple of days, trip to Miami at this point of the year is a great trip. It's a great vacation. Even if the weather's a little bit colder than normal in Miami, it's still warmer than we've got in the New York area. So that's pretty good. And then the Jets get the Dolphins Week 18 at home. And you always want to get the Dolphins the end of the season when you're a Northeast team. When you're the Jets or the Patriots or the Bills, you want that game you're hosting Miami in the AFC East to be at home, because Dolphins are not a team historically that has traveled well and played well in cold weather. Heading into the season, it felt like this might be a big game in the AFC East. The AFC East, at least at the start of the season, a lot of us thought it would be a 3-team race, and the Jets of Miami would be battling Buffalo. Well, as we know, the Bills have already clinched the division with 5 weeks to go. Not really much of a race. The Dolphins have had their share of issues with Tua Tagovailoa, missing all that time from that scary hit he took at the beginning of the season. And the Jets, of course, have had their issues. And at this point, it almost feels like a waste of time to talk about what the Jets can do on offense, because the Jets have spent the entire year showing us that they can't play quality football on that side of the ball. And a lot of it, I think, goes back to the quarterback position. And even last week, the Jets put 21 points on the board, but in reality, they had one long drive. And that drive was aided by a face mask penalty, because Aaron Rodgers had just taken a bad sack that knocked the team out of field goal range. And then the face mask penalty on the sack gave the Jets new life. It was a third down play. He was sacked. The Jets were going to have to punt. Jets got new life and scored a touchdown. The other two touchdowns, well, one of them was a kickoff return for a touchdown. The other was a situation where the Jets got the ball in a short field because of a Seattle fumble on a kickoff. One of 3 Seattle fumbles on kickoffs, 2 of which the Jets recovered. And the Jets were unable to convert the second one into a touchdown, turned into the Leonard Williams pick 6, which turned the game around completely. Jets had one drive that went for more than 40 yards last week. And that's obviously not going to get it done. It's been one of the stories of the season where, aside from some very, very fleeting moments, you can think the game against New England where Aaron Rodgers, had a kind of a flashback to his Green Bay days. That second half against Houston where Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson just, went crazy against the Texans secondary. There have been very few moments where the Jets have been able to move the ball with any sort of consistency this season. And we know that they've actually got some pretty decent players on this offense. I know it's easy and it's a cliche to blame most of it on the quarterback, but sometimes it is on the quarterback. And I think that, a lot of people are just afraid to say Aaron Rodgers looks like he's near the end of his career. Aaron Rodgers right now reminds me of something the great writer Peter King, the guy who covered the NFL for decades for Sports Illustrated and then NBC, said years ago. He talked about a conversation he had with John Elway, where John Elway told him, and this was like 10 years after Elway retired. It was around 2008. Elway retired after the 98 season. Elway said, "You know what? I could come off the couch and win a game today. I just couldn't win 2 because the pounding you take, the grind of the season, it wears on you, and it's tougher to recover as the season goes on." I think it's one of the things we've seen from Rodgers this season. Aaron Rodgers, the beginning of the year, if he did not look like vintage Aaron Rodgers outside that New England game, at least looked like a credible quarterback. And as the season's gotten as the season's progressed, he's gotten worse. This is going to be an interesting game from the standpoint that the Dolphins haven't shown much of a pass rush this year. This is a very average Miami defense. It's not terrible. It's not great. If you look at most of their statistics, they're kind of middle of the pack. We talked yesterday with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins about it. Kyle Krabs had good things to say about Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins' new defensive coordinator, about the way he makes other teams' offenses work. But the Dolphins don't have a great pass rush. And the question is Rodgers going to be able to stand in the pocket in this game? Because Rodgers is, first of all, he's not really been apt to throw the deep ball all that much this season. What he has, it's not looked good. I mean, I was at the game last Sunday. It just anecdotally, that ball kind of labored in the air when he threw it deep. Well, now you're going down in Miami. The wind's probably not going to be as big of a factor as it's been in New York, unless there's some weird weather event on Sunday. It's going to be a little bit warmer, and you're not going to be facing a ferocious pass rush. We know Aaron Rodgers is not going to be a consistent deep ball thrower ever again. That's almost certainly going to be the case. But can he have like that one flashback game? I have a theory. I've mentioned it before in years past on the podcast. I've talked about it with Joe Flacco, is that when a guy's at the end of his career, there's always like that one big game lurking in him. Even when he's washed up, even when he's clearly past his prime, even when he can't do it anymore, there's always like that one game where he can summon the past, where he can deliver. And could this be that game for the Jets? Again, we know that they've got some pretty decent skill players. Garrett Wilson's an excellent receiver. Devontae Adams is not the Devontae Adams who was a first-team All-Pro in Green Bay, but he's producing at about a 1,000-yard pace on a Jets offense that's really struggling. I mean, he still can play. What the Jets gave up for him in the context of giving all that up and taking on his contract at 2-4, that was crazy. It was a terrible trade. But he can still play. I mean, there's no question Devontae Adams can still be an very effective wide receiver in this league. And then Breece Hall, who, despite his 2 fumbles on Sunday, has been playing at a high level since the first 6 weeks or so of the season. They're the pieces in place that could do some damage against this Miami offense if the quarterback can stand tall in the pocket. And we know Rodgers can't really move that well anymore. He did move better against Seattle. So I think there's a difference between the Rodgers we saw who was dealing with the ankle and the knee and the hamstring injuries, and the guy we saw against Seattle. Because the guy we saw against Seattle, it wasn't fast. Still can't really outrun defensive linemen, but at least can slide within the pocket. He can he can find a soft spot in the pocket when he's under pressure. And even though he wasn't much more effective doing that, at least extended some plays, at least brought some plays onto the table that weren't there. So I think, look, the story of the Jets season is that they've really struggled to produce splash plays. And look, a lot of that goes back to Breece Hall, even though Breece Hall's playing a lot better lately. There haven't been a lot of home run carries out of Breece Hall so far this year. Well, they're going up against the defense as average could be. And they're going up against a unit, again, that doesn't have a great pass rush. And the few instances we've seen Rodgers stand tall in the pocket this year, it's when he's felt safe. And generally they've been when the other teams rush 3 guys. Outside of this, I mean, there was one sack he took against the Colts at the end of the game. I think it was a strip sack. But a number of his best plays have been when the other teams rush 3 because he's actually felt comfortable standing in the pocket. Can this Jets offensive line with Olu Fashanu, who's, we talked earlier about the guys who, some of the young players worth developing. He's one of the handful of young players that's worth watching in this game because you want to see how he responds to an excellent performance against the Seattle Seahawks, where he pitched a shutout in pass protection. But can the Jets make Rodgers comfortable in the pocket? He's been uncomfortable all season long, and it's clearly led to negative things. Look, I don't have a lot of hope for this offense, but this could be a game on paper. And I know I'm reaching because that's all I do. Like every week we head into these games, and I'm just trying to talk myself into the Jets offense doing something. I'm trying to talk you into some scenario where the Jets offense can do something. Is this the week where they go off? There's things that are lining up where if it's ever going to happen, maybe we get a little bit of it this week. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. This Miami offense, I think it presents some challenges for the Jets defense. We'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Friday game preview edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Checking out the line for this game, Miami Dolphins favored by 6.5 points at home against the Jets currently. If you're a Jets fan, that line looks awfully small, I think, but who knows? maybe they can win. Well, if you want to get in on the action again, FanDuel.com is the place to go because you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. Jets heading to Miami for their annual game in South Florida against the Dolphins. We're previewing that game. Now, this Dolphins team on offense is a team I think you just have to throw the statistics out for. And I know that's an easy thing to say with a lot of opponents, but for the Dolphins, it's true because the Dolphins team the Jets are facing is not the Dolphins team that's been on the field for most of the year because Miami's lacked a quarterback for a good chunk of the season. Tua Tagovailoa, you may remember early in the season, took that ugly hit. There was all the speculation, would he retire? Would he ever play again? He's back on the field. And, you can say what you will about Tua. Is Tua, a top 10 quarterback? Probably not. Will he ever be a top 10 quarterback? Probably not. But he's a functional NFL starter. He can run the Miami offense in a way that none of their backups could. Miami was not a team that really did a good job taking care of its backup quarterback spots. And with a quarterback like Tua, who has got such a concussion history, you kind of have to wonder why the Dolphins handled backup quarterback the way they did. It was a very almost negligent of Miami's front office, but we'll leave that to Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. I've got enough criticism to go for the Jets here, so I don't need to find a second team to criticize. The point being, though, is that this is a Miami team that is more dangerous than the statistics would suggest because, if you look at just on paper, you see they're only averaging 19.3 points a game, 24th out of the 32 teams. Now, it's better than the Jets, but not an explosive offense. But we know this is a Miami team with plenty of firepower. And, I think you obviously look at the wide receiver position. Tyreek Hill, who is not having a Tyreek Hill style type of season, not having a vintage Tyreek Hill type of season at least, well below his standard from the last couple of years. Now, part of that might go back to the quarterback play, but also Jalen Waddle. This is a team with as much speed at the wide receiver position as any in the league. This is the team I always talk about. I always talk about Miami around draft time because everybody, when the Jets are about to draft a wide receiver, they always say, "Oh, we gotta have this guy complement that guy who has a different skill set than Garrett Wilson." And sometimes it's just about loading up on one skill set and overwhelming the opposition with it. That's what the Dolphins do with Hill and Waddle. It's pure speed. And of course, yesterday, if you listened to the show, the crossover show, and if you haven't, go check it out after this one. Jonnu Smith has emerged as one of the top targets in the Miami passing game as well. I think there are a couple challenges for the Jets in this game. First is that, it sounds like Jets are going to be without Sauce Gardner. Jeff Ulbrich does not sound very optimistic. Sauce playing with a hamstring injury earlier in the week. Ulbrich mentioned, against this kind of speed, you don't really want to go with a player who's less than 100%, especially the hamstring. You can't go with a guy who can't run full tilt. And I think part of this is at 3-9, there's no real reason to expose Sauce to further injury. I give the Jets were in the middle of the playoff race, even if the Jets were on the fringes of the playoff race. If the Jets had a 5-7 record the way the Miami Dolphins do right now, and they were kind of on the outside looking in, but at least still with a fighting chance, maybe the Jets would be more inclined to put Sauce Gardner on the field. I don't think they're going to do it in this game, which means the rookie Quantez Stiggers, this is going to be what they call a baptism by fire. And we'll find out, we'll find out we'll find out a lot about Quantez Stiggers. It's a tough matchup for him. It's tough for a rookie to make his first start against. I think very likely we'll see Quantez Stiggers step into the starting lineup. And if you go back to the preview show, and I know the coach is gone now, but if you go back to the preview show we did back in September with Ian Eagle of CBS Sports, Robert Saleh, told Ian Eagle relayed to us a conversation he had with Robert Saleh, where Robert Saleh said Quantez Stiggers will be a starting cornerback in this league, but it's going to be tough for the Jets. And I think they're going to have to give these corners some extra help. I think you're going to have to see plenty of too high looks, two safety deep shells, because I think he and DJ Reed both need help. You may remember last year, that game I mentioned, the 30-0 Miami blowout in December of 2023. Tyreek Hill did not play in that game, and the Dolphins kept getting Jalen Waddle matched up against DJ Reed. And as good as DJ Reed is, as good as DJ Reed was last year, and as good, DJ Reed really struggled against Jalen Waddle. DJ Reed will be the number one corner for the Jets if Sauce Gardner's out in this game. It's just a tough matchup. But if you're playing two high safeties, you're leaving yourself susceptible to the run. Miami has a couple decent backs. And I think Quinnen Williams, if the Jets are going to win this game, if the Jets are going to find a way to pull the upset, Quinnen Williams has to have a monster game. And it's been one of the stories of the season. That Houston game, Quinton Williams just took it over, especially in the first half. I think that I don't think Quinton Williams ever got enough credit for that Houston game, because the Texans were on the verge of blowing the Jets out on a number of occasions in that first half, and Quinton Williams stood strong. I think tackling is also going to be an issue for the Jets in this game. Now, I think they've tackled better in recent weeks. We remember that fiasco in Arizona. The Jets went back to the basics in practice against the Indianapolis Colts the week after that, and I think they tackled better. Off the bye, I didn't think the tackling was a huge problem against. I mean, there were a couple misses, but I didn't think tackle was a glaring problem the way it was against Seattle. And look, against Mike McDaniel, the Dolphins head coach who runs their offense, he's very hands-on with the offense. He's as good of a play designer as exists in the NFL. And it's one of the things that's like, it's really a contrast when you look at what Mike McDaniel does with the Dolphins and compare it with what the Jets offense does, with Nathaniel Hackett and Todd Downing, because it's amazing how many times the Dolphins get a positive play just based on design, where they motion a guy, there's a formation, it's just an easy pitch and catch from Tua to one of his receivers. It's a 6, 7, 8 yard gain on first down. Now, an offense can only get so far by that. At some point, you need your quarterback to be in the pocket, to be able to read a defense, to be able to push the ball down the field. You need guys to hit their blocks. You need your offensive linemen to move guys, to open up holes for your running backs. At the end of the day, in the long run, offensive productivity comes down to, can your guys execute? But coaching can do things on the margins. There are, you can manufacture offense to an extent. There are a couple times a game, if you design your plays well, where you can just generate, a positive 6, 7, 8 yard gain on a first down by design. And Miami does that as well as any team in the NFL. And, I think the jury is still very much out on Mike McDaniel's ability as a head coach in a lot of areas. But one area you cannot doubt on him is his ability to design those types of positive plays. The question is, can the Jets tackle? Because go back to last year when the Jets played the Dolphins, I think it was true in both games, the Black Friday disaster in the Meadowlands and then the December blowout in Miami. Jets did not tackle well in those games. And there were a couple times where, if you miss a tackle, does a 6, 7, 8 yard gain turn into a 25, 30 yard gain? Jets need to focus on the fundamentals. Jets need to play disciplined football. Jets need to show up in this game, because I think there's always a question, especially with this Jets team, with how poorly this Jets team has responded to adversity. If they get behind a little bit, what's the compete level going to be like? This is going to be a tough game for the Jets. I think the Dolphins are the better team. I think the Dolphins team that will take the field on Sunday is more talented than this Jets team. I don't know the other way to say it. The Dolphins obviously are going to be the better coached team on Sunday, but the compete level is something you can control. And the basics, the fundamentals, tackling well, that's something you can control. And the Jets, there's no excuse for the Jets not be in this game. The Dolphins aren't that good. The Dolphins may be better. They're not that much better. If the Jets show up and compete at a high level, they'll be in this game in the fourth quarter. And maybe they'll be able to steal a win. But that requires doing the basics well. It requires a big game from their big players. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps others.